I wanted to talk about, why do we have Haftarah? Anybody here know why we have Haftarah? What does Haftarah mean, by the way? Yes, Mark, you can unmute. You can unmute, yeah.
There were times of Jewish persecution when they weren't allowed to read the Torah. So they read they were presumably allowed to read other parts of the canon, and they read the Haftarah.
Right. So great, excellent. That's one explanation. Anybody else heard about that? Anybody else? Yeah. So we'll welcome Isaac in a moment. So what wasn't allowed was to read from the 5 books of Moshe, by 5 books of Moses. And we know that Torah reading is a very old tradition. It was set up in Israel as a triennial, which is interesting, but I don't think it was done like I'm not sure exactly how it was done, actually. If every year they read the first third, then the second third, I don't actually know how they did it.
Continuous. It was
What, Helen?
in Israel, it was continuous. So they start, let's say for Parsha Breshit, first week they read the first part of Parsha Breshit. Second week they would read the second part of Parsha Breshit.
Right, that's what I thought. Right, it's not that they did the first third and then the first third of Noach, which makes more sense because otherwise it feels like the story keeps getting choppy. So they read the first third, then the second third, and the third third, and et cetera, right? And it was a triennial cycle. So we know that the Torah, welcome Moshe, welcome Isaac, that the Torah must be read. Actually, we say there shouldn't be more than 2 days going by, or 3 days, without reading Torah, which if we know we read it on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, not even counting Rosh Chodesh and holidays, but let's just say in a regular week, which means that Sunday you wouldn't read it, but then Monday you would, Tuesday, Wednesday you wouldn't. So remember, you never have more than 2 days passing that you don't hear something from the Torah being read. So I don't know if that happened then, if they had time to go to the marketplace to read the Rishon, they would read the beginning. It's like what I call highlights or coming attractions of next week's Parsha. That's also read on Mincha of Shabbat. But as Margaret pointed out, and I actually looked this up, Chabad had 3 reasons that were given, which I thought was interesting. I only knew the first reason that Margaret said, that there was a time, they said it was 168 BCE under the rule of King Antiochus IV of Hanukkah infamy, and that they were not allowed to read from the 5 books of Torah, which is what we read every Shabbat. So what did the sages do? They didn't just randomly pick any Haftarah. Haftir, I think, means like an extra piece, although Peter Rechem is the firstborn, I don't know. But lahaftir, I think, means to leave over or extra. Same thing with maftir that we read on Shabbat. It's an extra portion. It's not part of the regular 7. Sometimes it's repeating the last few psukim. Sometimes it's adding if there's a special day that's happening, like Rosh Chodesh or say Hanukkah or something like that. Yeah. So how did the sages decide what to pick for the Haftarah or Haftarah? Any thoughts about that? Yeah, Isaac, you have to unmute us.
How's that? Okay. Well, there's a related theme. I mean, a related theme to whatever.
Something.
Or generally, yeah.
Or another option, it's related to the Parsha, or what else could it be related to? People can unmute, like, I don't see a problem with that. It's okay.
A holiday or time of year holiday.
A holiday, we wouldn't even be reading the Parsha.
Oh,
We would be reading, but yes, I agree with you. We'd be reading something special that has to do with the holiday, so it would be related to holiday. When we read an extra, so yes, it would be some theme that's related to the Parasha. And why would they do that? They did that in order to somehow remind people, if, for example, in this Haftarah that we're going to read, the first pasuk is very similar. It says, Abraham zaken baba yamim, that Abraham was old, and I don't know, baba yamim, older age. And David was baba yamim, was also older and coming to the end of his life. So that reminds people of, oh, hi, Ellen. That reminds people of what would have been read in the Torah. Does that make sense? And I can understand that from the point of view. I think it becomes a little bit more esoteric when we get to prophecies of Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, but certainly when it's stories, it feels like we can connect it. It has always been on my one of my bucket lists. One of them is to read all the different trucks and laning because I love laning. I'm almost there, not quite there, but I'm getting close. Another one was to learn about the Haftarah and to connect it to the parasha, to actually spend the time. We already missed Bereshit, Noach, Lech Lecha, Vayera, not your fault. That's because I was away. And when somebody suggested it, was it you, Phyllis, who suggested it? It was Phyllis. You get 2 points or 10. And I was so excited as soon as you mentioned that. I know we tried a few different options and they're all great options, but this is something I've always wanted to do. Just spend a little more thoughtful time. Just people, if you can unmute when you're not, sorry, if you can mute if you're not speaking only so that we don't have extra noise, but you're very welcome to unmute if it's quiet or if you want to say something, please feel free to do that. So this has been one of the things that I love to do. And what I do to prepare for it is I have a few books, I think about it, and then this is our opportunity for me to bring the things that I learned. But as you probably know, anybody who's been on any of my classes, the richness comes a lot from your thoughts as well. So I would like people to absolutely feel free to volunteer what they're thinking as we go along. All that good? By the way, I have just a trivia question. What happens if you have more than one Sefer Torah? Let's say you have a maftir because it's Rosh Chodesh or because it's Chanukah or Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah, or maybe Parshat Para or Shkalim or Zachor. Remember, all those have a special maftir. So the Haftarah for those weeks, the Haftarah, would that be connected to the parasha or to the maftir, the maftir?
The maftir.
Ellen, was that you? Helen?
Yes.
Why? So what's the rule? Do you know?
I don't know what the rule is, but like I know that there's a special Haftarah, or even let's say if the following day is
Machar Chodesh, right? The next day. Yep.
or
100%.
or for special
For the special Shabbatot, yep.
people.
Or even for Parashat, for Chazon, that's the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, and then Nachamu. So that has to do with the time of year. We discussed that as well. Did you say that, Isaac, maybe? Somebody did? Where's Isaac? Is he still here? I guess I'll come back on. Oh, there he is. So it could be to have to do with the time of year. The 7 Haftarot of Nechama, of comfort, supersede. I discussed this in Shul. They supersede whatever we read that week for Shabbat, because that time of year of comfort between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah is more important. But here's the rule, Helen. The rule is generally, unless there's a reason not to, you read the Haftarah connected to the last thing that we read. So if it is Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, for example, then we read Parashat HaShavua, and then we read the special maftir for Rosh Chodesh. So then we read a Haftarah that has to do with Rosh Chodesh. Now, if it is Sunday, that would be the one exception to the rule, because we don't read a maftir portion. Everybody following me, please stop me if I'm saying a word that you don't know. Hi, Lance, welcome. Susan, welcome. Ellen, I think I said hello to you. Rick, welcome. So Machar Chodesh, tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, is a special portion that we read only when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Sunday. And actually, if you have Rosh Chodesh of 2 days, Shabbat and Sunday, it's interesting. I don't remember if you read the Haftarah for Rosh Chodesh or the Haftarah for Rosh Chodesh being on Sunday. It's an interesting question. I just don't remember. Maybe some places read both. That is one of the reasons that we read Haftarah. Now, what Margaret pointed out, which was that we weren't allowed to read Parashat HaShavua in those times, and therefore the sages instituted adding Haftarah that will at least give us a feeling that we learned Torah. It'll remind us a little bit either of the time of year or that day or the parasha. And you know, Jews, once we start a minhag, we don't like to stop. Minhag avotenu biyadenu. The custom of our forefathers is in our hands. Biyadenu means we do it. We don't like to stop. Yes, Isaac.
Just curious, being that one of the reasons they seem to have developed the Haftarah is because we weren't allowed to learn Torah. Were the Greeks that obtuse that they didn't understand that this was Torah as well? Or
well, that's a good question, Isaac, but I think they saw it differently, just as we see it differently, that the 5 books of Moses are God-given. They're godly given, they're midoraita, they're given on Har Sinai. So the others, they saw more as stories. It really is stories. It's really history stories, mostly. And then it's like a history book. And then there's the prophecies of the prophets, like Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel. So there's a clear differentiation between the 5 books of Moshe and the rest. Did you want to add to that, Ted?
Yeah, I think there's actually another reason.
Please.
For one thing, to respond to Isaac, in order to read the Haftarahs, they weren't taking out a Torah scroll. So the Greeks might not have
visual.
recognized- Yeah, they might not have
Nice.
recognized that something was being done. But I think there was something else. There's a Christian concept called typology. Christian commentators would look at the Hebrew Bible and say everything in the Hebrew Bible foreshadows something in the Christian Bible. Some of them are very far-fetched. Some of them are pretty obvious. For instance, the sacrifice of Isaac, or the Akedah, for them foreshadows the crucifixion. And you have, you know, when the Christian Bible was written, the authors were obviously relying on the Hebrew Bible. So Isaac carries the wood for the sacrifice, Jesus carries the cross, and that kind of thing. I think what the rabbis were doing was saying, no, this is a closed corpus, this is a closed body of literature. Things in the Torah may refer to things elsewhere in Tanakh, but not outside, not to the Christian Bible. So it's an assertion of the wholeness of Tanakh.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, by actually reading past the 5 books, you're saying that
Right.
all of so that's the opposite of a little bit the opposite of what I was saying. Very nice, Ted. Thank you. I love academicians. Is that how you pronounce it? They always have what's ahead, and it's
You don't hear
fantastic.
that often.
What? I don't know.
Don't
It's
hear
one of
that
those
often.
words. I needed to say it. Occasionally, you got to say it. Judy's here. Vivian's here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So I see you. Susan, I think you missed it. You came on a couple minutes late. I said Haftarah is like maftir. It's not with a taf, it's with a tet. And it means, I believe, an addition. And that's like maftir is when I think it's either the last or addition. I'm not sure. I could look that up, but it is with a tet. So Haftarah or Haftarah does not come from the word Torah with the taf. Susan, did that answer your question for you? Yeah? Whoops, where'd she go? Did I just, oh, you're off camera. Okay. All right, that was one of the answers. Here's another answer. I just wanted a thumbs up if that answered it for you, Susan, that's all. Or if you had more questions. And Stephen Weinrich, maybe? I don't know which Stephen. Yep, Stephen Weinrich. Wait, yeah, did people think it started at 11:30? Is that what happened? I see a lot of people came on 11:30. So we had decided on 11:15. For now, we're keeping it 11:15 because sometimes we go over a little bit, but going past 12:30 doesn't feel good to anyone. Because we're hungry by then. Yeah, parade. What is a parade? Ptira? Oh, so it might be ptira because ptira is somebody who passed away. It's what's left over. Maybe that's what it means. I'm not sure. I think, you know what, Judy? Where is she? Just have to find everybody. Judy, you are going to research that for us for next week. I task you with that. Okay. So we had a few options for the word maftir. I didn't find the exact translation. It's probably a few options for it. It's extra or leftover or something like that. And Judy's going to research that for us. The next explanation, listen to this, is that originally Jews would stay in the shul every day after morning prayers because they didn't have work or I don't know what. And they would study different sections of the Torah. But then they couldn't. They had to go out to work. They couldn't afford this luxury of extra time. So they cut down to a few verses, okay, to a few verses from remember Uva L'Tzion, that has verses from the Nevi'im, from the prophets, but they still wanted to keep a remnant of this minhag, this custom. So on Shabbat, they would say, we have extra time. we're going to add a chapter or so from the Nevi'im, which I thought was really, or from Melachim, from the rest of Nach, not only from Torah, but from the Nach part of Tanakh. That's a second one. And the third one, offered by more recent Jewish scholars, is that the Haftarah reading was instituted to combat the influence of those sects that viewed the Torah as consisting only of the 5 books of Moses. That's what Ted told us. So thank you, Ted. So I think it is. I mean, maybe it is, but that's what recent scholars said. Okay, and it was read as far back as Mishnaic times. Mishnai times means the Tanaim, the sages who wrote the Mishnah, which is around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, close to that, a little bit after. They recorded the discussion from around that time. All right, now that we did that, first thing we're going to do, I think every time, is to recap what the parasha is about, or if we happen to hit a Shabbat that has a special Haftarah, we may decide to read that instead. I haven't gotten to that yet. It's an option. At least once we should learn the Haftarah of Machar Chodesh, when Rosh Chodesh is Sunday, or Shabbat. We'll probably do that. But for now, I'd like to talk about Parashat Chayei Sarah. Parashat Chayei Sarah. What happens in Parashat Chayei Sarah? So people are welcome to drop in the chat or say one line about things. I'll start off. It's about Chayei Sarah, the years of that Sarah lived, but it's actually about her passing away, and then Abraham burying Sarah, trying to find a plot. But really, the connection to the Haftarah is what happens after that. And the majority of our parasha, or a lot of it, is about the story of Abraham sending whom?
Eliezer.
So I know that we call him Eliezer. I'm actually probably writing a Dvar Torah on that, but it doesn't actually say in the Torah that it's Eliezer. No, it's the Midrash. And we immediately latch onto it because it's convenient, I think, because we like it, and because another place we know that Abraham called the only Eved we know the name of is Eliezer, and we think that he's the one, but it is the Eved. One second, I can't read the chats yet, but I will take a break to read them in a moment. I saw a couple of people sent us chat. So he is a long story about Abraham sending his Eved, his servant, who is now his messenger, his shaliach, to find a wife for Yitzchak. Very long story. I think it's a well-known story. If somebody doesn't know the story, raise your hand. But the general story people familiar with, Abraham sends the Eved. The Eved goes with camels, looks, goes back to Abraham's birthplace, actually, and finds Rivka, who is a relative of Abraham. She is a great niece of Abraham. And then he sees her, he says to God, oh, if only somebody will come out. I want to find somebody who has chesed, who has kindness. And if only somebody will come out and offer to give my camels water to drink, that will be the right one. And lo and behold, 2 seconds later, Rivka appears. And then he gives her jewelry, and then go back to Laban's house. Rivka goes back with him and ends up being married to Yitzchak. Remember all that part? Is that all ringing bells with people? Good. This is great. We actually do a review of the parasha at the same time. And then Yitzchak is comforted. Then Abraham is getting to the end of his life, and he marries a woman named Keturah. And the Midrash tells us, our sages, the Midrash tells us that Keturah is none other than Hagar. You actually muted yourself, but I saw what you said. Hagar. We don't know that for sure. It's the Midrash, but whoever it is, he has many more children. But who is the one who Abraham leaves his legacy and his belongings to?
Yitzchak.
Yitzchak, exactly. So that more or less summarizes the parasha. If anybody has something else to add, you're welcome to. But that is a synopsis of our parasha. Now let's go to the Haftarah. So I want to check if people here, if you can come with a copy of the Haftarah, that's very helpful. If you can't, then I'll put one up on the screen through Svaria. If somebody here is not able to, doesn't have a touch, or is not able to, raise your hand, please, and then I'll pull it up. You don't have an option, Ellen? Okay. So give me a moment, because at the beginning, the people on had it, so just a minute.
I was just going to add one thing, is that at the end of the parsha, he's buried by both Yitzchak and uh,
Ishmael.
Ishmael, right?
Yeah, I know.
Which,
I
which
love that.
means,
Thank you.
yeah, so do I.
Yep, it's really beautiful. It's actually one of my favorite pieces that at the end of Abraham's life that the children come together. Thank you for saying that. That's great. I'm not sure that's exactly what happens actually in the Haftarah. So now, by the way, anybody who wants to, for weeks going forward, you have the permission to read the Haftarah if that's helpful to you, but you don't have to. We will go over it. Just we'll have more time if people want to read it. It's often stories, not always, but it often is. All right, this is Sparia. Let me see if I can get it to be, let me see, next to each other. If so I want to draw your attention, first of all, that the most automatic connection, and it's a little hard to hold the whole Parashat Shavua, the whole Parashat and the Haftarah at the same time, but we did tell the story, but there is a linguistic connection. Second. There is a linguistic connection just in the first pasuk, which I think a lot of people then say, oh, that's why we read this story, because the words in the parasha match the words here. So hold on one second. Just have to find it. Just a moment. Here it is. It is in anybody who wants to, you can keep a Tanakh or a parasha with you. You can open up a Siddur or, Torah reading, whatever works for you. I think it's a nice thing to have if we ever want to compare. There's a verse in chapter 24, verse 1 of Genesis, of Bereshit, which is part of our parasha, that says, Ve'avraham zaken, and Abraham is old, so you can see it right here. It's on the screen. King David was now old. Baba Yamim, it says here also Baba Yamim, advanced in years or in age. And just that is an exact copy between Abraham and David. So even if this is not the only reason that the sages chose this particular chapter, it certainly was a key and a guide. And I bet that when the sages were in there, I always like to come to stopping share for a moment. I always like to call it the subcommittee on which Haftarah, it's like a game show. Will the real Haftarah please stand up? And I would assume that at least on some of them, they didn't all agree on which of the chapters should be used. I bet there's probably a few different connections, but this feels like such a great connection because the same wording is used. It's almost like whoever wrote the Melachim, I don't know who wrote it, but maybe Shlomo wrote that, but whoever wrote that pasuk, V'hamelech David, that the King David was advanced in years, it sounds so much like he was quoting, or she, but probably not a she, was quoting what was written in the Torah. Now, let me just take a break and look at the chats to see if there's anything. Tech problems, okay. Years ago, bar mitzvah boys only learned the Haftarah and said, that's true. The Haftarah was considered popular. There's still places where boys or girls read the Maftir and or just the Haftarah. It's a different trumpet, it's a different sound. It's a more mournful tune. And Susan wrote, but isn't it true that there is no apparent or easy connection between the Torah part and the Haftarah? No, that's exactly the opposite of what we said, Susan. So we said at the beginning, there is an easy connection usually, but we want to deepen it because the sages, when they chose the Haftarah, they chose something that has a connection. So there should be an easy connection. That's exactly what should be. But what we're going to do here is we're going to take some time to look at maybe deeper connections or the less obvious connections. Yes, Ted.
So just a question. Why is it that sometimes there's a different Haftarah for Ashkenazim and Sephardim?
Yeah, well, why do you think?
Well, it's different traditions, but I'm just wondering how they developed. Did your subcommittee on Haftarahs
include Sephardic? Well, maybe they hadn't decided. No, that's interesting. Or maybe the Sephardic community, let's say, because they were Ashkenaz mostly then, I think. In Bavel, as far as I know, Pumbedita, I'm not that familiar with it, but maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they said, this isn't helpful. I mean, it's, this wasn't written in stone, right? These are not This is not biblical. It is from Rabbanan, it is rabbinic, but it's, I don't know if it's exactly a halacha. I don't actually know that. If that's considered halacha or a really, really, really strong takana, decree or custom. So I don't think that it's such a big deal. Again, not that I could change it, I don't have the authority, but they probably felt they had the authority to find something that made more sense. And sometimes when these new subcommittees got together, you know, I believe that people feel emet, they feel truth inside of them, and it really must have bothered them. So they picked something else. I think what is interesting, Ted, that if we happen on a Shabbat where there's a difference, maybe I would spend some time researching beforehand why one was picked and the other. That would be kind of interesting for us to compare one to the other. Yes, Isaac.
You know, I never really paid attention to that. I mean, I've seen where it says Ashkenazim start here, we end here, Sfardim start, but not that there's a totally different Haftarah.
Oh yeah, there's sometimes it's rare. It's not common, but absolutely there are some, and now you could notice it. It's in the, I don't know if it's in the Sansino so much, I don't remember, but I'm sure that the Stone Chumash has that. And yeah, and others, yeah. It is
I have a
interesting.
question.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Susan, I can hear you.
If Abraham had other children and they're
Yes.
sort of not mentioned in our time or even recent past, that would be a news article, an article of gossip, a television program, or lawsuits. How is this glossed over? Who gave birth to the other children? Why is it so vague, and why is it
No,
not
so Susan,
talked about?
actually, I'm sorry, I think you missed out on, we did talk about this. He married Keturah, and
That we heard, that I know of,
but
you said,
it's listed at the end of the parasha.
but you said he had more children.
That's
said
who I
he
was talking about. The ones who are listed at the end of the parasha.
Are
You
all-
look at the end of the parasha, there's an actual listing of their names, but he gave them gifts. It says he gave them gifts, and then whatever was left, he gave to Yitzchak, because Yitzchak, look, it's a good question, but I guess that at the time, at least, the father could decide who he leaves his wealth to. I don't have a better answer to that. It's a good question, though. I like that idea, would be a lawsuit. Moshe and then Vivian.
Yeah,
Wait,
You mentioned that-
Vivian, 1 second, Moshe first. Yeah.
okay.
You mentioned that this was already in the time of the Mishnah that they had the Haftarah.
That's what Chabad told me.
Oh, okay. But what I would think then is that you have two traditions even in those days, because there was the Babylonian and there was Eretz Yisrael, just like we have the Talmud Bavli. Whatever.
So maybe it was, yeah, maybe that was, I don't know which is the Sfar tradition though, yeah.
Well, you would think that the Babylonian became the Ashkenaz.
You would, yeah, I would think that, I agree.
Yeah,
I don't
Thank
know
you.
for sure, but that may be a reason for the distinction between the two traditions.
Nice, thank you very much, you're right, that's a good point, that there would be a differentiation there. Vivian, thank you, Moshe.
yeah. Well, I wanted to respond to the previous issue about why certain things weren't, why Yitzchak was emphasized here. The whole purpose of doing this was to show the continuity and why Yitzchak was the one. And they also emphasized Yishmael too, because he also had a great nation and all that. It's also included.
Nice,
So the two offspring of Abraham were Yitzchak and Yishmael.
the two beginning, no, at the beginning.
Passed it on to future
Wait,
generations.
Vivian, wait, no, the first two offspring. At the end of the Parsha, there's a lot more offspring.
There are more offspring, but they don't emphasize how they occupied land and they went here, and it's much more inclusive of what they did and where they went and it was.
So are you
Uh,
trying to say this points out the agenda of the Torah is to
Yeah.
set, yeah. It highlights the part, somebody once explained in this interesting way, he said that the Torah is not a history book. He said, imagine that you have a car hurtling down a highway. It could pass many, 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 many intersections. Then it
Mhm.
stops at an intersection and zooms in and could spend a lot of time at that intersection and then gets back in and zooms past many more intersections, which is not what you do when you have a history book. When you have a history book, you have to spend more time at each of the junctures. You have to at least mention them. So what you're pointing out, Vivian, which is an answer to what Susan asked, that there's a reason behind it, whether we like it or not, but there was a reason behind it because the Torah has an agenda. There's a reason that the Torah picks specific stories to tell us. Yes, 100%. Now, I assume there must have been some sort of law that allowed the father to leave whatever he wanted to whatever of his children that he wanted. Otherwise, as Susan said, there may have been a lawsuit. But all right, so now, yes, Stephen, you have to unmute.
You're talking about the connection of the Haftarah to the Parsha.
Yeah.
Which
we haven't quite gotten there.
Which is what normally makes sense, I know. However, this Haftarah very much has some sort of foreshadowing, if you will, about the next Parsha. And I don't want to know whether that was chosen because it's brothers vying for the kingship.
Wow, that's pretty cool. You know what's so interesting? You said that because,
considering that it was chosen much later for that, I don't know.
I mean, that's great. I love that idea. Let's all keep that in mind. As I said to you, people offer richness that I didn't see anywhere, and I never thought of that. I think that's kind of brilliant. I mean, that could just be because the stories are parallel, and therefore, sadly, you know, that brothers don't get along. But I think that's an interesting point because let's just, you know what, Stephen, just hold that thought for 1 second. Remind me of it also. I love that idea. But let's just talk about what the story is in the Haftarah, because that will help us go further. And so here's the story. And I can't read every pasuk. I don't think we'll have time for that. But it starts out with saying he was old, he's advanced in years, and his circulation was poor. He couldn't stay warm. So they brought somebody to be there for him. And that was this girl named Avishag. And Nara Betula, you know, that's always important to say she was a virgin. I don't know, because it said specifically, maybe a little bit later, that they did not, where was that? The king was not intimate with her. Not clear why. Was he not capable of it? Did he decide not to be? He had more than one wife, so that wasn't the issue. I don't know why this is so important to write. I don't want to spend too much time on that unless somebody has something to say that has to do with the Parsha. But what's interesting is that in our Parsha, Abraham is older and his years are waning, or he's advanced in years. Although let's remember, Abraham did have a lot of children after this. Whereas here it says David, who only lived till the age of 70. And we know that Abraham is much older. I mean, he had Yitzhak at age 100. So obviously he's much older. Yitzhak's, I don't know, 37 now or whatever he is. I don't know how old he is. Yeah, about 37, I think, when his father picked a bride for him, I believe. So we know that Abraham still had, you know, was fertile at that point, but it still says that they're advanced in years and they're worried about some sort of succession, and a bride is sought. But interestingly, the bride here, or the woman, is sought for David himself, whereas in our Parsha, Abraham seeks a bride for his son. So some of the commentaries that I read said, sometimes it's a connection to the Parsha, and sometimes it's a contrast to the Parsha. So we might be able to explore both of those ideas. Why are the sages bringing it? This is a better way to do it, and I have some ideas about that I'll bring to it. In any case, they bring Avishag. She's the one who spends time with him. Reminds me a little bit of the 6 Wives of Henry VIII. I don't know if anybody ever saw that. Just reminds me a little bit of that, although there each one had to be killed or die before he brought the next one. So it's not exactly like that. So the first part is just about Avishag. And now look what happens. We know that King David, had many sons. And his second in line is somebody named Adoniah ben Chagit. By the way, I know somebody, a friend of mine, whose name is Chagit, and her sister's name is Avishag. So it's interesting, I guess, that the family, you know, loved those names, and for some reason took both of them from this perek where there were 2 of the wives of David. I don't know if they also have a Bathsheba. I don't remember. But I know they both had Chagit and Avishag. They have that. So what happens? Mitnaseh. Adoniah ben Chagit, the son of Chagit, mitnaseh comes from naso, or to rise up. And what it means is somebody who is boasting or has pride or puts himself over other people, which already I think is a sign that this person should not be king. We don't want a king of Israel to succeed David, who is going to be a boastful person and thinks himself greater than others. And he is assuming that it is his turn, it is his right to be king. So he actually tries one step. He provides himself a chariot and horses, an escort of 50 outrunners. And what happens? Lo atzavo aviv miyamav. his father had never scolded him or set him what we call tough love, put down guidelines. Interesting. Let's notice that the whoever wrote this is kind of scolding David, I think, for not scolding Adoniah and not telling him, hey, you can't just do whatever you want. So he always did whatever he wanted. So here, it's interesting. Here are some reasons why he thought, at least, and maybe why the text thinks that it might be his right to be king. First of all, he was born after Avshalom. Avshalom having died, who's the oldest is Adoniah. And we often think that the oldest son, isn't that what happens in England? Right? That's the succession to the throne, is the oldest one after the oldest progeny is the successor to the throne. I mean, it took Philip a long time till he got there, but he did get there eventually. So because Avshalom had died, he was killed, I think, by Yoav, Adoniah was David's oldest living son. And look at what it says, like him, he was very handsome. I found that really interesting. Any thoughts about that? That would be a reason that he should be king. Why? I mean, why else would the text tell us that? Any thoughts?
I want to say something that's not so much about handsome, although it's nice, but when you do Jewish genealogy, you find that a lot of very well-known Jewish last names, both Sephardic and Ashkenazic, claim descent from King David, never from King Shlomo, never, but many from King David. But we have no mention of the in-between families, what these sons were writing about here and reading about did, who they married, who they gave birth to, who they begat. There is no mention, but there are so many names that are listed as descending from King David, and there's no link. There's no.
Is there a question is this a comment or a question, Susan?
There's no mention in the Torah or in this or anything of what families, what wives, what families came from these sons. Just mention of handsomeness, or who would be king, or jealousy, but no talk about who they married,
and that was what Vivian, I think that's similar to what Vivian said before, that the Torah has an agenda. So it's only spending time on the ones that are important to the author.
Mm-hmm.
1 second. Isaac, then Vivian, let's just keep it short so we can get to the Haftarah. Yes, Isaac. You're muted. You're muted. You are muted.
I think the expression handsome, I think it's important. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, there is something about somebody having a certain look, and handsomeness is, it's like, it made me think of like Shlich Tzibur on Yom Kippur, when we say, I heard somebody who's na'im for the community, who has a beautiful voice. There are certain attributes, physical attributes that make a difference, even in Malchut. So, I think handsome is a positive trait, and it means more than just physical handsomeness.
Like a charisma. How about charisma?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay, great, thank you. 1 second. I see that a few people want to speak, but Moshe put up his hand a long time ago. Moshe. And maybe it's helpful if you put up the raised hand. That could be helpful if you can. Yes, Moshe.
One reason might be because of what happened with Shaul and Shmuel and Shaul, when God tells Shmuel, I don't look at the external, I look at the internal to decide who should be a king. And the other aspect may also be that, like you were saying, charisma, people who look good are very often able to attract followers.
Exactly. That sounds right. So, and I bet Adoniah probably had a lot of followers. Vivian, did you want to add to that? Because I know you raised your hand before.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I agree with what we just said, that God had made them so
It's true.
and so it comes from God. I mean, well, how do you become attractive looking or not?
Yeah.
It's God makes that.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
interesting. Thank you. That's very
everything
interesting.
that you said,
No,
very
that's
hand-
interesting. It sounds to me, Vivian, like you're saying, as we heard before, that somebody who's charismatic, who's good looking, people like to follow that person very often. And you're saying it's almost like he said, well, God made me this way, so that must be a sign that I'm the right person for king. Nice. Bringing
Exactly.
God into it. Beautiful.
Is
Robert
there-
and Judy. Go ahead, Robert.
The Torah says that those who are they're like the face is not even, or the
Yeah.
parts of them are crushed, or they're not,
Yeah.
not physically, well, they can't serve as Kohanim.
Right.
And so things like that are physically perfect or beautiful,
Yeah. Yeah.
are more inspirational to the people.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
I hear
I
that.
mentioned before, the part about Abraham was old, Abraham Zakein, that's
Yep.
the very last line of the Hallel.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting,
Look for
right?
it. Yeah.
Hold that thought. You can look up why we say it then. I don't know why we say it then. Ted, Phyllis, I don't know which one of you.
Okay, I'm gonna upset everybody.
Go for it.
The book of Kings was written by a group called the Deuteronomists.
Ooh, that sounds familiar.
And they are not big fans of kingship. Because if you look at the history of Israel, the kings were a pretty bad lot.
Right.
And
Lovely.
it's unfortunate that as I look at the faces on of people who are attending, people were not at Judy Klister's talk over the weekend when she spoke about David. We tend to glorify David, Melech Israel, and all that.
Yeah.
But David was a very, very flawed character.
Yes, this is true.
And-
Bathsheba killing Uriah.
Right, and Judy Klister focused on the story with Bathsheba. But remember, when that story ends, we find out that strife will never leave the house of David.
Yeah.
And so this, but part of the reason with the business with Abishag, that she's a virgin and they're not intimate, is because this is a bad reflection on David. This was David the hero.
Wait,
And
what's
now-
what's a bad reflection?
that David is lying in bed with a young virgin and nothing happened is a reflection, because David was known, for his relationships with women as well, the Bathsheba story. And what we have here is a tangle over the succession.
Yes, we haven't gotten to that. We still want to get to that.
Right, was the succession supposed to be hereditary? After all, we start with Shaul and then we move to a different family. And just because you're the eldest son of the king doesn't mean you're qualified.
Right. That, yes, as we know from Reuven and Yehuda.
Right.
Okay, great. One more thought, Judy, and then let's go back into the Haftarah. You have to unmute, Judy. No? Lower the hand?
Yes.
You don't want?
Yes. The word handsome isn't so surprising. It's, if I were a man, I would say it's just, equal to, in the Torah, so often we find women referred to as beautiful. So this is for man's rights, that the Torah can talk about a handsome man.
No, I understand that, but why? Why was that important to say it here? That according to what I was reading and what made sense is that the reason the Torah said it is because it gave him some indication of the charisma or people following or that
Right.
God. That's all I was talking about. I don't have a problem with the not the Torah, sorry, the Deuteronomists writing it, but I'm just saying why? Why would it dafka be written there? That's what I was trying to say. All right, people just go on mute so that, Margaret, yeah.
I'm sorry but Ted, I disagree. I've heard a lot about the negative publicity that he gets, but there are some very positive things about Melchizedek, and that one of them is that his whole incidents with Bathsheba, he proves himself to be a role model in terms of tshuva, okay, in terms of tshuva. Also his extremely close relationship with God. And I see this, the reason that the Torah, Navi might have said that included the fact that he did not sleep with this woman or have relations is a tribute to him, because he did not take advantage of her. She was there to keep him warm. He not go further. I see that as a positive thing.
I'll just respond very quickly by saying, if you had heard Judy Klister, you wouldn't be so eager to talk about David's teshuvah, that it's not really teshuvah.
I've studied Navi. I'm doing Nach Yomi for the second cycle, and I've also studied extensively, and I don't agree with that approach.
Okay.
Oh, so that's one of the nice things about Torah, is that there are different approaches and we can learn many things from it. So I'm appreciating it. Here we go, two opposite approaches, and we probably have what to learn from each one. Isaac, I just want to get to that Torah.
I know.
Yes.
I just a quick response to, his David being intimate with this young woman. The text, I think, very clearly makes the point that he was frail and somewhat feeble. She was brought in because he couldn't stay warm. I mean, it more than suggests that intimacy, physical intimacy, wasn't going to happen, and that that was his state.
That it wasn't his choice, but it was his state of being.
Right. Okay.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on and read what happens. Okay, so I just find it so interesting that, first of all, the Torah seems to be telling us that David did not, I don't want to say scold, but he didn't bring him up properly, because he didn't set limits for him. So he sounds like he was a little wild and perhaps felt very entitled. And so there's three reasons here. One is that he felt very entitled. Two, he was the next in line according to age. And the third is that he seemed to be charismatic. Okay, so what does he do? He goes to somebody else with Yoav ben Surya, who's the one who I believe killed Adoniah. I believe so, if I remember correctly. I'm not that good about the history, keep the names right. In any case, he invites a bunch of people. He confers with them, he discusses them, but who does he ignore? He ignores Sadok, he ignores Benayahu, he ignores the prophet Natan, was a very important person, Shimei and Rei, Shimei v'Rei, and all those people and these fighting men were not with Adoniah. So Adoniah was very smart politically, knew exactly who to call. The next step that he does, he makes a sacrificial feast, which is what they used to do, at least, I guess we do it now as well, in order to celebrate something. So basically he's celebrating the fact that I'm going to be crowned king. My father is sick, he's old, he's tired. He's not going to last much longer. He invited all his brother princes, all his brother sons of the king. Who did he not invite? Natan, Benayahu, the fighting men, or his brother Shlomo, Solomon. Now, one of the things that I also read was that it wasn't so 100% clear that everybody at that time wanted Shlomo to be the successor of David, because even if David did do tshuva, whatever you think about David writing it in the end or doing tshuva, the beginning of it was not well done. By taking Bathsheba, who was the wife of somebody else, it's constantly showing, people will always be reminded that this is the son of that woman, which was problematic the way David handled it. So not everybody was so happy about it, and Adoniyahu was trying to capitalize on that feeling. So what happens? Natan knows very, very, very well that he was ignored and that Shlomo wasn't invited. And he sees exactly what's happening in the politically. And by the way, we know that even when a king names his successor, there's often bloodshed and fighting. Unfortunately, politically, it's hardly ever ends well. But certainly when he didn't come outright and say and do something about it before his death, then it's going to cause even more trouble. So Natan wants Shlomo to reign. He knows that Shlomo is the right successor in the eyes of God. He goes to Shlomo's mother, Bathsheba, said, oh, you must have heard this, that Adoniah is trying to usurp the throne, and David is in his room being oblivious and not taking control. Whereas David was a very strong man his whole life. This is not typical of David's behavior. So now Natan gives Bathsheba some advice. He says, take my advice, anyway, save your life of your son Solomon. And he tells her what to do. Go to King David, tell her, did you not swear to me that King Solomon will be the successor? And why is Adoniah the king? And while you're talking with the king, I will come in after you and confirm your words. So what happens? Bathsheba goes to the king. And again, it's a reminder that the king was very old and Abishag is in the chamber. I guess when a woman was in there, a wife, the others couldn't just randomly come in. Bathsheba bows low and she says, what's the problem? He says to him, she says, well, so she says exactly what Natan said. Your son Solomon, you promised me, will succeed me as king. He shall sit on my throne. Now Adoniah as king. And you, my lord king, know nothing about it. And he's prepared this sacrificial feast. So we're hearing all of this all over again. He invited all the king's sons, but he didn't invite Shlomo. And all of the eyes of Israel are upon you to tell them who should succeed. I guess David had not made an announcement. So what's going to happen if you don't do something about it? Nobody will take Shlomo and we'll be traitors and we'll probably be beheaded. And now the same thing happens that Natan had suggested. She's still talking to the king when the prophet Natan arrived. So before we continue, I want to show this connection. Remember the story of the Eved, the servant, who goes to Rivka? We hear what happens. Then we hear him tell what happens to Rivka's father. We hear the story 3 different times. So that is another connection, a literary connection, although it's interesting to see if they're for the same reason, and that's something we could possibly have time to discuss. That is a second connection that we can see, at least a second connection. Also, we're talking about succession no matter what. Even though it's not the same kind of succession because Abraham wasn't a king who had to announce it, but we do know that the story of Abraham, it's very clear at the end of the parsha that he's leaving everything to Yitzchak. Of course, we had a lot of foreshadowing of that because he's the one of Akedat Yitzchak, and we see that Sarah sent away Ishmael and Hagar. We know Yitzchak is the one who's chosen. But it says that even though Abraham had many, many more children, Yitzchak was still the chosen one. And in the story in Melachim and Kings, we're going to be clearly told that Shlomo is the chosen one. So there's another parallel, I would say, a parallel. Let me just see, somebody wrote, Achloket l'shem shamayim. What was that about, Judy? Machloket l'shem shamayim. I'm not sure what that was referring to. You're muted.
Some of the participants were arguing, and I just thought it was nice.
Beautiful. Machloket l'shem shamayim. That was from Margaret and said, beautiful. Thank you. Love it. And it was a shem shamayim. It's for deepening our knowledge. I would venture to say they're both correct. They both,
Right.
David has positive points and David has negative points, and we should learn from them. Okay.
Right.
I have a question, and it's about
Yes.
the word Eved or Oved. How do we know
What is
this
Ovid?
Oved? I'm talking about an employee or somebody working.
Oh,
for
Oved,
Oved.
an Oved. Okay, somebody who
Okay,
works.
are we
Yes.
talking about somebody who's working for a wage? Or are we talking about somebody who's indentured or a slave?
What are we talking about? Oved or Eved?
That's my question. It's
So
a,
an Eved
it
is
is a matter only of a vowel. So how do we know the nature?
a
of the
vowel and a
work.
letter. Oved also has a vav. How do we know it? Because that's the way Hebrew works. It's been handed down from generations. I don't have a better answer for you for that. Oved is a,
Slave.
I'm not sure what you mean by how do we know? It's
Slave.
that's what the
Do
accepted.
we know if if wages were paid, if this was a
Are you
real?
talking about to Abraham's Eved?
Yes.
Well, I personally do not know. It's possible. Maybe wages were paid in terms of, giving him a home and food. Maybe he had more than that. I don't know.
How do we know when somebody is a paid worker? How do we know when somebody is?
Do you
not
mean in
being-
the Tanakh?
In any of these instances?
Well, the only one we have here is the Eved. That's the only one that comes up in our parsha. So if that's what you're talking about, our tradition tells us that an Eved is a slave or a servant.
Mm.
So, Vivian.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that our current translation of Eved is exactly what it was in those days. Maybe it was an honor to serve such a prestigious person. And it wasn't looked down upon. On the contrary, the person who served someone like David Hamelech or Shlomo or any of these people or Avraham, they had a certain standing, that they were highly regarded, and not in the sense of slave that we think of today.
Well, and I guess servant still feels better than slave, and I think Eved can mean either one. Like a shifcha, a maidservant.
Expression that who was it? Eved Hashem.
Right. That's true.
God.
Beautiful.
So if we don't
Beautiful.
have God, we have someone representing God, like the king, and someone to look up to.
Yep.
So it may have a similar type of overtone, like this person is to be respected because he is so close to.
Well,
this
I mean, Eved
other
Hashem,
person.
I hear what you're saying, although Eved Hashem means,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's something to think of. One second. Thank you. Phyllis, quickly, and then Judy.
I just want to go back to now our earlier discussion about the word handsome, that it makes us look and say, really, is that what really mattered? It's more than how you look, or even if you're charismatic, it matters whether or not you have the ability to take on that position.
Correct.
Yeah.
And remember, it said mitnaseh, which is somebody who holds himself superior to others, which is true in a way for a king, but not in a, what's the word for it? Somebody who holds himself above. Yehirut is arrogance. So that's what it feels like. And Dafka, the text uses that word to describe what haughty. Haughty is a good word for that, which probably is the reason that Natan, the prophet, said, this is not the right person to be king. Thank you. Judy. You're muted. You're muted.
I was going to say the same as Vivian did it concerning Eved Hashem, and
Nice.
also
Yeah.
within like the isn't the Amida sometimes called the Avoda, like worship, or not?
So that's what Susan is asking. How do we know when it's work, and how do we know when it's slavery? So the thing is Hebrew is
Not workers. My question is about worship.
No, I understand what you're saying, but Eved is not work. That's a tough one. I mean, it's not accepted to be that way. I can't tell you if it was at the time.
Okay.
It means somebody who
All right.
was in a subservient position, no matter how you look at it. But
Right.
Hebrew is not a rich language. It has a small otsar milim. It has a small vocabulary, 70,000 words. So you have to use the same root to mean different things. Okay, it's 12:15, so I want to go back to our Haftarah and see if we can get through it. So now the Natan comes and shows deference to the king. And now he says the same thing. He now he's reinforcing what she said, what Bathsheba said, according to what he said, according to what he suggested to her to do. And now he said the same thing all over again. And they're eating, drinking, they're saying, long live King Adoniah, but he didn't invite me, or Tzadok, or Beneo, or Shlomo. Now, this is interesting. He also calls himself Hodata et Avdecha. So he calls himself your servant to the king, and in deference to the king. But can this decision have come from my lord the king without your telling your servant? Could it be that he's kind of being a little tongue-in-cheek. He's saying, could it be that you decided on Adoniah without telling me? Is that possible? And immediately King David says, summon Bathsheba. And then he finally rises into his own and becomes proactive and says, as the Lord lives, Hay Hashem, that's an oath. The Lord who has rescued me from every trouble, that sounds like an Eved Hashem, somebody who follows God. The oath I swore to you by the Lord that your son Solomon should succeed, and I will fulfill it this day. And so she immediately says, long live King David, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. Then he says, summon to meet Tzadok. All the people who had not been invited to Adoniah's feast. And he said, take my loyal soldiers. Remember, he said that the text told us that Adoniah had not invited the fighting soldiers. And then he's now finally going to announce and anoint him. Let the priest Tzadok and the prophet, wait, I'm not sure if that's even part of it. Oh, this is not part anymore of the Haftarah, which is interesting. It ends at 31. May the Lord King David live forever. I'm going to put this in the chat. So that's also interesting to see where it ends. That's enough for the Haftarah, according to the sages who, I knew it when I was reading. I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't read that when I was reading the Haftarah. All right, so this, I want to know if people who know the story from the Torah and now read the Haftarah with me, if you have thoughts, I have some things written down before we leave of what could be the connections and the takeaways. If anybody has thoughts they want to share between the Torah and the Haftarah portion. Margaret? No, just unmuted. Okay. I do a close watch on those who are unmuted. Isaac?
I'm not going to talk about the connection. I'll just make the comment that this was a beautifully scripted plan that, they thought out. I mean, it's like, it reads beautifully. It's like something I could really watch, like in some,
You're saying the Haftarah, the Haftarah.
the Haftarah, yeah.
Yeah, it's political intrigue. Like, I don't watch TV, but a Game of Thrones, maybe something like that. I don't know because I don't watch it. But I could imagine that people like to read things or to watch things like that. Ellen's smiling. Do you watch Game of Thrones, Ellen? No, so you don't know either. Okay, neither do I. Any other thoughts of connection before I have something to share about that? Anybody else have thoughts? Thank you, Judy. Bebakasha, unmute, please.
A glaring fact about the comparison between the Haftarah and the Torah portion is the heroes there, Abraham and Sarah and David.
Well, Sarah's dead, but okay.
Right, okay, Abraham and David.
Okay, go on. What do you want to say about them?
Well, just that's, they're the main characters in both the Torah and the Haftarah.
I understand that, but do you see a comparison, a connection?
Yeah, well, Chai v'Kayam, we're also, with the Bnei Abraham.
Oh, that's what you meant. Sorry. Okay, got it.
David,
I missed that part.
David, Chai v'Kayam.
Okay, thank you. So it's a continuity. Anybody else have some suggestions, something they want to add?
I have a
Yes,
suggestion.
Ellen.
Okay, it has to do with inheritance and continuity. In other words, in the case of the Torah portion, it has to do with finding a wife for Yitzhak, so that there's the continuity of the Jewish people. And in the case of the Haftarah, it has to do with the continuity.
Yes. Thank you. For those who don't know Helen, she lives in Rochester and has started by joining our 750 Tefillah, and we're so glad that you're part of our bite. Yes, thank you. So it's about the continuity. So that, I mean, it seems pretty clear. It's a really, this was one that was a little bit handed to our sages on a silver platter. It feels so connected, even though, of course, the stories aren't exactly the same, different times, it's the kingship. But I do want to add something, a thought, and that is something from this book. It's called Sod HaHaftarah, The Secret of the Haftarah. I bought it the night before I left Israel, which is Sunday night, and what is today, Wednesday? Lose track. So it's somebody named Shimon Viton, never heard of him, but it was staring me in the face when I walked into Pomeranz, and it said, buy me, because you're teaching this about Haftarah. Oh, he said something really nice that I liked. He said that he thinks that in this case, it's more about the comparison between how Abraham handled the end of his life and how David, I'm seeing some nods, handled the end of his life. But what I love is that David rose to the occasion in the end. We don't always handle things well for whatever reason. We're not feeling well, we're tired, life took us in a direction. Maybe David 1 second said, I will let you have whatever rebuttal you want. Don't worry, I will give you that time. And that's, by the way, what enriches the conversation is that people are coming with a lot of knowledge from different backgrounds. Margaret studying Nachomi, Ted comes from, other backgrounds. So I'm really appreciating how it fleshes it out for me, or for us actually, for the whole group. But he's saying maybe the lessons we learn are two. So he says, one of them is you gotta be a guiding person for your children. You have to set down limits. You have to raise them with guidelines. You can't just let them roam free and not scold them or not give them limits or limitations. So they did respect David, but he kept trying one more thing. And he ended up pushing a little bit too far, enough that it woke up Bathsheba and Natan, or Natan called Bathsheba. And then they came up with a plan. And immediately David was able to salvage the situation by coming out strong. But he made a mistake, which is very human. And the second one is, this I also really liked, said that when somebody is leaving the world, then you want to tidy up your affairs. You don't want to leave people to squabble as much as possible. Squabble after you, to fight over things. You know, we did, Rabbi Ezra and I did that series on end of life, whenever it was, a year ago, 2 years ago. And that was really about whether it's writing a will or a spiritual will or taking care of your affairs, whatever that means, making sure that your affairs are in order, whatever that means for every person. If it's financially, I spoke to somebody, a lawyer who deals with wills, and I said, somebody asked me a question. They said that one of their children is clearly financially well off and the other one is much less well off. So how would it feel to leave more? Would she recommend that they leave more to one? And she said, 100%, do not do that. You will cause so much friction and strife if you do that, even if one of the children is more well off. Let them decide if they want to help out, but you could help the one who needs help before you pass on, which I thought was very interesting. So this is about leaving yours in order. That's just a tip from a lawyer who dealt with it. Okay, those were some things I wanted to share. I know that Ted wanted to share something, Bavakasha.
I don't want to upset Margaret or anybody else.
No, it's a machloket l'shem shamayim.
But
I'm not upset. I'm not upset.
no, but a
Having a
few verses after this Haftarah comes the Haftarah for Vayechi, which happened to be my bar mitzvah Haftarah. And in that Haftarah, David is talking to Solomon and he says, you know, all those people I promised I wasn't going to kill because they rebelled against me.
I don't want to hear this.
Kill
Till
Well, it's in the Tanakh, but yes, okay.
Which is not necessarily such a wonderful way of handling things.
Oh, you're saying maybe David didn't do such a good job.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is within the context of this. I agree. There's a larger portion, and that would probably have to do with learning the Book of Kings, which I think is. But here's the thing. I really want to invite us to zoom in on what the sages chose, and maybe they chose to start here and end here to take what lessons we can take. Even if the same person maybe made a mistake later on, that doesn't change the fact that when somebody gave him feedback, he woke up or she would wake up and take care of it. All right. So thank you. This was not the first time I did it. It was fun for me. I appreciate it. What people added here. I'm excited to do this week by week. I will learn a lot of history, I'm sure. And my family loves history. So this brings me more into what my family does, what they like doing. My son's an archaeologist, so clearly he likes history.
Wow.
And I want to thank everybody for joining. Next Thursday, I know it's the first class because I was away for 3 weeks because I had a granddaughter in Israel right at the time when I had a retreat in LA. I'm sorry that just happened to be. I was expecting to teach 2 classes in between. But next week is Thanksgiving and I could do it, but I feel like people are in travel. People are doing things with family. So maybe some people who will come on, but it just didn't feel like nice to the people who are busy with family. So, and there is I'll be very busy actually at the Thanksgiving meal at the night. So, you know, hang in there. And in 2 weeks, Bezrat Hashem, we will return and I will mark for myself which of the parshiot we did not have an opportunity to do. And maybe this group will decide if they want, thank you, Margaret. If they, oh, did somebody say they wanted to see a picture? I mean, if you really do, I could show you. But anyway, I will mark down which of the haftarot we didn't do, and maybe we'll decide we want to do them next year, even though they're not related to that parsha of the week, just to make up, or we can save it for another year and then do it. But I will mark down which of the ones we do and which of the ones we don't do in case we want to continue, because obviously we're going to miss some for whatever reason. So thank you for joining me. This is fun for me. I love text. And it's nice for me to.
Teaching tomorrow.
I'm teaching
Tomorrow you're teaching
in Hebrew. Who asked that? Yes, yes.
great.
Tomorrow,
Yes,
Sivan.
great.
Oh, I'm sorry. Next Wednesday, my mistake. We are doing next Wednesday. It's the Thursday one we're not doing. Oops, my mistake. I was thinking of Erev Chag. We are having next week. My apologies. I am still jet lagged. I really apologize, people. I didn't get it. We are absolutely having next week.